Hello, everyone, and welcome to another GoMobi.work coaching conversation. Each week, we are bringing you a topic in coaching, leadership, and performance development that you can take back to your team to help you all live better and work better together today. So, it's just the two of us today. So we had a very special guest last week, and we're going to be talking a little bit about everything that we discovered in that conversation a little bit later. But we are very excited because this topic, which we have today, is something that we care a lot about and something that we find a lot of businesses can make a few changes and create some incredible results. So today we're going to be talking about innovation. And I am joined, my name is Wade Bruffy. I am the co-founder and CEO of GoMobi.work, and I am joined as always by my co-founder and our chief coaching officer, Zoltan Sarda.
Hey everyone, good to have you here. This is one of our favorite topics. Wade and I have been talking about the concept of innovation and how companies can build that within the idea of how do we build a better coaching system within the organization. So good topic for us to dive into today. Looking forward to it with you.
Yes, I'm really happy that we're doing this one, Zoltan, because I feel like this is something that there's a lot of talk about innovation out there, and everybody has a kind of good idea of what that looks like in terms of the products that are created in a lot of the times if you're a business leader. But the conversation doesn't often involve what it looks like from a performance development perspective and how the coaching process and the mentorship process can play a role in innovation. So I think we've got a nice, unique spin for this one.
Absolutely. And it can really either enhance innovation or it can stifle. So that's, I think, something for us to keep in mind, like how do those things happen? I need permission to share my screen. Wait.
Okay, great. And that's how everybody that's tuning in, that's how you know that this is a live event, because we are having fortunately fairly smooth sailing, but every now and then something might happen. So here we go.
It's the new world of Zoom. All right. So again, fostering innovation. Again, this is really one of those key pieces. And just a little, if you've been watching these sessions over the last several months, what you'll see is some real commonalities between them. One of them is really focusing on clarity. We've really been thinking about, so in a coaching situation, what role does clarity play there? It's also been really thinking about how do we bring a higher level of intentionality into coaching our employees. And so this conversation is really about those two things, and it dovetails, I think, really nicely with this concept of how can companies foster innovation from their workforce. Wade and I have been reading this book, Ben Sau's book, Built to Innovate. I got it right here, right in front of me. Great book. I really recommend anybody using it. It really aligns with a lot of the work out there right now on terms of what coaching looks like and what manager coaches roles are. But we're going to do it sort of a high level overview of Ben's book and think about, like, how does this apply to some of the things we've been talking about. But one of the things that he talks about is, like, there's that companies that are really effective innovators, they have two engines running and they run simultaneously. They're running at the same time. And what he says is that there's this execution engine, which is like, let's just make sure things aren't falling apart. Make sure that, our sales are what they need to be. Make sure that we're not slipping in anywhere. Make sure things are, chugging along smoothly. And then there's this innovation engine, where that's the engine that's driving, like, what are the new products? What are the new ideas? What are the new places that, that we can bring this forward? And one of the things he talks about is that some companies have the idea that you're going to do your execution engine. There's going to be a whole department that just does that. And then, like, innovation comes in sort of the R&D department or whatever, some specialty department there. But he says effective companies is actually across the organization, that everybody is working as an part of the execution engine, and everybody is working as part of the innovation engine. And I think from our long history of talking about coaching and manager coaches and the role of manager coaches, it really this idea of this dual engine, I think, really works well in thinking about our work. So again, Ben Bensow talks about like what are the processes in each of these engines, and so what he says is like the execution engine is really like it's deliberate. There's a lot of analytical work going on. It's data driven. Like what are the sales? What are the let's look at customer satisfaction. Let's look at market share. Let's look at all these things and really make determinations on what we're doing there. It's about implementing what we're, really getting good at implementation as opposed to thinking about new ideas or optimizing our systems and our work, the way we work. And then a key piece here is also avoiding failure. How do we make sure that things aren't going to fall apart? But what he says is that in the innovation engine, there's some things that are slightly different here. So it's a different way of working in some ways. And so it's really networked. It's across departments, across divisions in an organization. It's very flexible. There's some level of informality to it, right? The sort of the data-driven and analytical aspect on the execution side is a little bit more formal. This is a little bit more informal on this side. There's this aspect of experimentation, and then also having some comfort with embracing failure. Like, and so it's an interesting thing that we're looking at, like, how do we manage both those things in an organization? We had last week, we had our good friend Jen Young came, and she talked about sort of the manager's role and how we were fascinated by how she went immediately into this concept of left brain, right brain, that, managers and organizations often work or they prioritize left brain processes, right? So it's that idea of deliberate, analytical, linear, sequential, logical, those kinds of ways of thinking. But what she's saying is, like, if we really want to really give people permission to bring their best selves into the work, our managers have to also approach this from a right brain perspective, which is it's about relationships and it's about emotions. So she talked a little bit about, like, for managers to really think about what are their things that are driving them. Are they needing to control, or is it, what's the role of their ego in this work, and all those kinds of things. So, in the right brain, you're sort of processing those things a little bit more. So obviously a little bit more creative, maybe less sort of linear, more organic kind of ways of thinking, or sort of this more diverse kind of connections that are being made. So I think if you go back and look at her conversation, I think these two pieces really dovetail perfectly well with this idea here. When we look at these descriptions that Ben Bensow has created, and then we look at how Jen Young talks about, the manager's role in how do we create an effective place where people can really thrive. There's some parallels here that I think are interesting. So
really quickly, if people are watching this, if people are watching this as a recording, or if you're watching this now, you can find that video on our YouTube channel. So just search Go Moby Coaching at Work, and you can see that video, that interview we did with Jen Young last week.
Yeah. And if you have, if you can see, you can grab the URL at the bottom of the screen here. Okay. All right. So a couple of things. Again, this is from Ben Bensow's work. And so, like, these are in thinking about a manager, excuse me, manager who is working as a coach. Like, our main role is to manage things, but also to coach our employees along for higher levels of performance. There's a couple of different roles that we're going to play if we're going to have a foot in both of these places. One of the things Ben Bensow also talks about is that in an organization, it's the frontline workers who are the innovators. It's not the executive. It's not even the mid-level managers. It's the frontline people, because they are closest to the work. They're closest to the customers. They're closest to what the real problems are. And the manager's job then becomes to facilitate those frontline workers in being innovative. while they're also focusing on the execution. So this idea of the execution engine, its focus, the main focus is how do we solve the problems that we got, right? We got some problems that we are working on. We got to make sure that they're solved so that we can function. There we have these sort of key results in line. You know, we know sort of what we're going for. We're looking for, this is the end result of this work. There's those key results are really tied to the bottom line of the company. What does the company need in order to function at the level that it is, or to keep improving? And then, of course, the main thing here is always providing support around those things. On the other hand, the innovation engine, that manager's role shifts a little bit. It's giving permission to step outside the box, to sort of engage in those right brain processes. Their job is also often, when we think about, as we think about innovation, it's as we said, it's across departments. So their job then is to, how do we link? Like, what are these people here saying and innovating on, and what are those people doing over there? And so how do we link both the execution and innovation engines? How do we link across and between teams? And how do we link the frontline workers to the executives in order to provide support and keep that communication going? So it's a different set of skills that you're engaged in with that. And then also always as to provide support in this area. So a couple of things that we think that comes up, and sort of from our conversation, this didn't come up in this way with Jen Young, but Wade and I have been talking about this a little bit, because there's this aspect of focusing on problem solving, and I'm going to go back here to avoiding failure.
Yeah,
we can become a little bit more cautious, right? And so we might default more to that execution engine, even if we're in a company that says we're innovation engine. So that idea of how do we, go ahead, Wade.
I think one of the, I want to I just add to your emphasis here. Like Jen sent me this video recently that was a TED talk of a woman who had a stroke, and the stroke occurred on the left side of her brain, or left hemisphere. And so she described this obviously terrifying, life-threatening event as actually a state of complete bliss, as her left side of her brain completely shut off, and she would go into this like floating world of everything being alive and connected, and then all of a sudden, like, that part of her survival mechanism would click back on and say, you need to get the phone and call for help very fast. So
right,
it's interesting. And the point that I wanted to make for that in the business context and is to your point of avoiding failure, and the execution engine does want to avoid failure. And the success of the success of the innovation engine comes from, a lot of the time, not having a direct immediate goal. Like, this is just open-ended time. So even in the obviously in this TED Talk example is an extreme example, but to say we are protecting this time to have no goal, and this is just creative time. That came up.
And that's interesting, because then it's kind of like, from a traditional perspective. So then it's like, if we don't have like this target, or this key result that's going to happen right now, like, what is our job then, right? So how do we make sense of that? But that idea of striking that balance, and so I think this is part, and Wade's going to guide you through a little exercise a little bit later, but this idea of thinking about the balance of the kind of conversations you're having. And so a couple of things of advice here that we think are important. And again, this goes back to this theme that Wade and I have in all of our talks. It's about clarity, and it's about intentionality. And so that idea about, I'm going to be deliberate and analytical about the balance between the conversations that I'm having. I'm going to keep track of it, pay attention to it. I might, if I see that I'm having most of my conversations are about execution with people, I'm going to maybe, start to have some conversations that are intentionally more on the innovation side. And then for that idea of during the sessions, create that space for creativity to emerge into the conversation. And I see we have Jane joined us. Welcome. And so we will move, and Jane, with your permission, we'll just continue on, and feel free to raise any questions that you have at any point, okay? So a couple of things here, again, and this also goes back to Jen Young's conversation about like what drives us to be in a particular way. What are some of the things that might be going on for us? And so like that idea of being sort of reflective about what's going on. So what might influence somebody to be more on the execution engine side in their conversations? You know, anxiety is part of it. It's like that avoiding failure. That's about anxiety. Or overly, you know, we focus more on solving problems rather than finding problems. It's one of the things that Ben Bensout talks about. It's like execution is like solving the problems. Innovation engine is finding problems. We might think that our bosses want something then different than what they actually want, you know, so maybe there's not a lot of clarity from the organization about how much do we want to innovate and how much do we want to focus on execution. And then there's also that piece of needing to control. I actually think, you know, this spot of, you know, I'm pretty good as a manager at what I do. So I'm comfortable with conveying that skill knowledge that I have and sort of forwarding that on. And then, you know, might be a little less comfortable with that idea of ambiguity. Like when Wade said, there's not really maybe a goal out of this session, where this is a really open space. Am I like, how does that affect my comfort level in doing this kind of work? And then finally, the idea of when we sit down into those sessions. So again, we've talked a little bit about our sort of inquiry-based protocol for manager coach discussion for O3s. If we're in the execution engine side, and if we've decided that this is going to be a conversation where this is a focus on execution issues, the questions start with these two stems here. What happened, basically? So let's like think about what's happened in the past, and then what are the solutions that we can find to solve those problems. And so, you know, we might think about focusing on what are the results of progress from recent weeks. You know, are we meeting deadlines? Is the team functioning well? Those kinds of things. Are we, you know, thinking about there's a particular situation we need to solve? And so the questions around that are what are the skills and knowledge and resources that we need to get better at? And then what are the measures of that? Like, how are we going to know that we're improving and our skills are improving? And then also this piece of like, we've got sort of standardized set business practices. How do our solutions align with those things? So we're not going off the rails and doing something that's not gonna work for that. We've talked with several business leaders that have talked about, you know, when people go off the rails, what happens there. So in this execution engine, going off the rails is not great, right? It's gonna likely result in failure, or often result in failure. But then if we're stepping into that innovation, the prompts are kind of different. You know, if we're having that conversation about how can we get more innovative, and that idea again that we are pulling that information from our frontline workers because they've got that knowledge about what the real things are that are going on. And so the questions then become, instead of what happened, we've shifted from thinking about the past to thinking about the future. What's possible? What are the problems we can find instead of what are the solutions we need to find? And then these questions like, what are you hearing from customers or from your team members? What are your thoughts about, like, what are some ideas you have about what approaches that we can add? What might success look like if we do this? How we know that this might be a good way? And then that question around skills and knowledge, instead of thinking about what do we need to get better at, what are the new skills that we need to, we might even not know what they are, but what if we start to think about that, like what is that new skill and that new knowledge that we might need to develop as we bring some innovation into play here.
And I think if you're thinking of it, I loved your analogy, Zoltan, of just thinking of the execution engine like a track. Like this is something that we're moving along in a very linear fashion. Whereas in the innovation mindset, you think of it more of a sandbox. I don't know if that's an overused or cliche analogy at
Right.
all, but you might see like a little kid playing with a train in the sandbox, but they might also go out and get a bucket or some other kind of thing and bring two things together. And maybe that doesn't result in any particular achievement, but there's things that are going on, interactions that wouldn't normally be happening. So
Absolutely.
I'm going to talk a little
I
bit
love
more about that in a second, but
no, I love that because it is kind of like, you've got the rails, and we're staying on the rails.
mhm,
Sandbox still has boundaries. It still has like places to keep it safe, right?
that's
But
right. Yeah,
it's a bigger space in which to explore. So I love that.
totally. So we thought of to expand on this point a little bit. We thought of it would be fun to walk through a little made up case study that we have. So we thought of Innovation Inc. and Execution Co. And these are two companies competing in the same market, and they are trying to deliver the best product possible for their potential customers. And this product must meet three qualifications. It must be powered only by the wind. It must be able to cross a body of water, and it must cross the body of water powered by the wind as fast as possible. So we're going to talk about how these two different companies might think about creating this solution to cross the body of water using the wind. So to start with Execution Co., we talked a little bit about goals a moment ago. And so this is the traditional, every effective company has goals that they work towards. And people on the team, the more they're aligned on the goals, usually the better these goals the team is able to meet those goals. However, they can be a little bit limited using the sandbox that we were just talking about earlier. So leadership in Execution Co. has defined the norms and the standards of really good execution, which more or less, once you get things right, are about maintaining the status quo and continuing to execute with excellence. And that's not necessarily a flawed way. It's just, as we'll get into in a second, it's a way that there's a possibility of leaving some innovation on the table, some cool thing that you could bring out of your team if you're too stuck on the execution side. So just to finish that bullet point there, this team is focused mostly on individual performance within the team. They know what they need to do, they do it well, and that's what they do. So that's their lane that they're staying in. Whereas in Innovation Inc., they're aligned around guiding principles. And so what do we mean by guiding principles versus goals? Guiding principles are descriptions of what we know we want to provide and what kind of value that we want to provide. So they're descriptions of behavior and practice. So if we say, I'll use an example of a company that I was previously working with. They were trying to launch a very innovative healthcare product. And so part of that was to build partnerships, because if you have a new technology, you're trying to fit it into what a hospital is already doing. I've talked a little bit about this example before, but the goal of that team was then, okay, we need some guiding principles to inform every project that we take on, because there's a project with this company, there's a project with this company, there's a project with this company. There's like 60 companies wide. It's a huge initiative. So what are the things that we know we need to get right every single time? And so and recognizing that with each one of these little projects, it's going to probably look a little bit different in practice, but we know that as long as we're working towards this ideal, then we'll be successful, because this is what our customers need. This is what we care about, how we work with each other. So defining all that stuff in advance was really helpful for us. So that's what Innovation Inc. is aligned with. Now, leadership has also, to Zoltan's point, if you're playing in a sandbox, the sandbox does have edges. So leadership has defined an environment for creating this innovation. So it's not that it's just a free-for-all, and it's not that you would want your right brain to just run wild and take over everything, because it actually doesn't have a very good way of moving towards something. So even in the innovative environment, you need those guidelines in order to make sure that you're moving forward with purpose and with intention, and moving forward with a clear alignment with the team. And finally, Zoltan was speaking earlier about the connectivity that's so important between teams in order to successfully innovate. So those structures are part of it. And we wanted to especially emphasize that managers in this environment, instead of just focusing on crossing T's and dotting I's, making sure that everything is going according to the plan, they're actually tasked with doing that part, but also having the communication with other teams, saying, hey, this team is over here working on this. That would work well with this team working on this. And maybe even if we don't have one individual thing isn't enough to solve the problem, if we bring these two things together, then we're getting somewhere. So these are our two different approaches. And from the coaching perspective, Zoltan, if you go to the next slide, we always want to talk about how these companies would approach it from the performance development perspective. So what we're seeing is at Innovation Inc., they're asking, what problems can we find? So they're trying to create this product, this tool that can cross a body of water using only the wind. So now they're asking questions. What kinds of problems do we have? Well, the water slows things down that move through it. So what possible solutions could we get to overcome that problem? And they're looking to make sure that if there's another industry that's helpful, that could possibly lend insights to this, they're asking those questions as well. So talking about bringing in other things from the sandbox. So maybe that's not something that they would normally use, but because they're in a play environment, and we have a conversation coming up with Elaine Chung on play very soon. So very excited for that. But just having that space to combine two things that maybe you wouldn't have thought of before. So as part of that mentality, we're getting away from the possibility of failure and the idea that if we don't produce something, that it's going to be a problem. So in this environment, it's okay to fail. And the emphasis is on what is the best possible thing that we can design, even if the market's never seen anything like it before, because we know that we want to create something that's unique and that that serves this need as best as possible, even if it's something that could have, things that need to be ironed out in the future. There's loads of examples of this too, but to go to Execution Inc., they're asking what problems need to be solved. So they have the needs of the market. They have all the ideas, the specifications, if you will, of what's going into this product. And they know that there's been a lot of success with this in the past. They're a great company. So they look through everything that they've done and they pick out the best piece of each because they know that they need to create a great product if they're going to compete. So they're also deflecting the possibility of failure. They're trying to set themselves for a high likelihood of success by choosing this safer route and doing it by the book. Because if they do it by the book, then chances are if something does go wrong, they can just say, looks like there was just a problem, execution failure. We tried our best, but it wasn't quite enough this time. It wouldn't be a blow up of what a terrible idea, because that's not part of their culture, right? If somebody comes with a poorly designed thing, they're thinking of it in a different way, and somebody might get reprimanded versus over at Innovation Inc., where they're acknowledging that failure is part of this process. So if we go to the next slide, we can see the result. And Zoltan and I are huge, we're big into boats in the water. So we chose these two examples. And on the left-hand side, you can see what Innovation Inc. made. It's a hydrofoil kite boat. And so what this is a boat that uses an underwater wing to fly across the top of the water, and a kite, because a kite is much more movable than a sail. It's not fixed to anything. So this boat is capable of record speed across water, whereas you see Execution Co. And there's nothing wrong with the boat that Execution Co. has built. It's actually a boat that's very near and dear to our heart. It's the Star of India here in San Diego. It's a very historic landmark. However, this is an example of something that's really well built, but it's not necessarily fresh thinking. And so you can see that there are two different ways of approaching this problem, and you're going to get a different result. And that's not saying that one is better than the other. It's just saying that these two things are very complementary.
It's just they both get the job done. It's just like, if you want to be thinking about, so what's the new thing that isn't there yet? That's, that's a key question here.
Great. So we wanted to take you through a quick exercise as we always end these meetings with. So this is something that you can take back to your team today if you want. And what we want to encourage you to do, and if you joined us, we started a little bit early today, so apologize for our timing. But one of the things that we want to do is always be prompting you to have something to take away. And so earlier we were talking about what are the kinds of questions that one might ask in an environment that's innovative versus execution focused. So if you're looking back in all the previous meetings you've had with your team, we want you to think about what is the balance that I have created between execution focused questions and innovation focused questions. So when you're in these conversations, what kinds of things do you bring up? Now, if you're more focused on the execution questions, you might reflect on for yourself how comfortable you are in talking about situations in which you're not the expert. You might want to understand better, how is my leadership team encouraging us or not encouraging us to focus on innovation? So we need to speak with our team if that's something that we realize that there's a skewing towards execution, because helping to start the conversation is the first thing that we can do. So it's got to be, you've got to be as a team comfortable with ambiguity as you go forward into this. So that's another thing that we would encourage you to reflect on is how comfortable are you if you don't know the answer? Are you able to say, that's a really good question, I actually don't know, let me find out a little bit more about that? Or is there a need to answer the question right away with an uncertain answer? Because that's a little bit less effective. And so ultimately, another function, as we've talked about, is that being that connective tissue is part of the innovative organization. So talking about what are our systems, I think there's the personal skills element, right? What do I do to connect people? But also, do these systems and structures exist within our company? Because if they don't, you're just one person, and ideally there's a whole bunch of people that have great ideas. So we need to systematically bring those up, boil those to the surface. So on the other hand, if you're defaulting more towards innovation conversations as part of your team, we might ask ourselves in order to achieve that balance between the left and analytical and the right and creative part of our brain and part of our organization, we might also ask ourselves, how comfortable are we about solving known problems? How confident do we feel in the ability of ourselves, of our team, to address something that's coming in? Or do we feel like maybe we're whack-a-moling a little bit when something comes up and just trying to make it up as we go? Now, if you're in a small startup, we can say, totally get it, that sometimes you have to make things up as you go. But chances are is you should be documenting these things, and as you learn, to get a little bit more effective and efficient every time with those kinds of things that you see often, because that's where the execution engine shines. Now, if you're a person that's super motivated by the new, chances are you are if you're here, but everybody can work on this. So always it's good to reflect on how excited and motivated we are by new stuff. Always good to keep ourselves fresh. And we might also ask ourselves, what kinds of knowledge do we need that will help us develop more effective approaches to problem solving? So there's a lot here that you can take with you, and we would encourage you to do these reflections before you go into your next meetings with your team. Maybe ask them what they think, how it's going for them, what their perception of the organization is, because these things are a team effort. And when we do them together as a team and create these systems, we can create incredible results and really make some cool stuff. So
thanks for joining us today. Again, we really thrive, we think, on the idea of intentionality and clarity. And so I hope this is helpful for people to think about. So, what are those sometimes unexamined things that are in our head about how we work with our teams?
Great. And I want to take this opportunity to open up the floor to our audience. Looks like Jane is here today. Jane, how are you doing? Let's see if she's available.
Maybe.
There we go.
There we go.
It was really good. It got me thinking. Some of the questions I asked, but you certainly posed a few more. I'm very big on reflective questions that
Beautiful.
people can really kind of match up the two things of what they know and what they don't know, and how those two things can come together.
Great. Well, it's, yeah, that's, really an important piece of this work is to take the time to really have some deliberate thinking around some of these questions. So we appreciate that you bring that into your work.
Thank you. It was a good session.
And Jane, out of
Appreciate it.
curiosity, where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from Orangeville, Ontario, which is just north of Toronto.
Fantastic.
Hey, beautiful. Spring is coming, I bet.
Finally, though you're in, I heard you say you're in San Diego, so you have far nicer weather all year long than we do, but I'm hoping that there's no more snow.
That'll be nice.
We've had it abnormally cold here this year, but we always are reminding ourselves. We do our little walk and talks when we plan for these and do other stuff between the two of us. So we always are reminding ourselves, despite any spitting rain or anything, that we still have it pretty good.
Well, and you know what? I still appreciate the seasons because each one brings something new with
Yes.
it, and very welcoming to see everything greening up here again. So
Great. Well,
Good
Jane. Oh, Zoltan, sorry, I couldn't hear you. What'd you say?
I just said good to have you join, Jane.
perfect.
Yeah, and if there's ever questions that we can answer, just let us know. We're an email away. We have your email from the registration, so I'll send you a quick just follow-up note, and we're here to help. So let
Okay.
us know how we can support you.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. A nice way to get started for the weekend.
Yes, great. Love it. A little bit of growth. That's what we're
Alright.
talking about.
Take care.
All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.